My name is Reese Parker, and this is the story of how a CEO's wife tried to destroy my career, only to end up destroying her own empire of lies. The morning I walked into Evercrest Solutions for what I thought would be my last day, the Seattle skyline was shrouded in mist, matching the fog of uncertainty surrounding my future. I had spent 5 years building my reputation as head of international market development, specializing in Asian markets. My fluency in Mandarin, acquired during 2 transformative years in Beijing, had opened doors that others couldn't even knock on. But apparently, all of that meant nothing when you accidentally bruised the ego of the wrong person. It started 6 months earlier with what seemed like a harmless side job. Student loans don't pay themselves. And despite my senior position at Evercrest, the debt from my MBA was crushing. When a friend mentioned a wealthy woman looking for a private Mandarin tutor, I jumped at the opportunity. The pay was exceptional, $500 per session. Twice a week. The woman introduced herself as Eva Chen. Though something about her perfectly manicured appearance and the way she avoided direct eye contact when saying her name made me suspicious from the start. Our first session took place in a penthouse apartment overlooking Puget Sound. Eva was in her late 30s, immaculately dressed in designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly salary. She explained that she needed to learn Mandarin for business purposes and to enhance her cultural understanding. The way she said it, with practiced precision, reminded me of someone reciting lines from a script. "I need to be conversational within 6 months," she declared, settling into a cream-colored armchair that probably cost more than my car. Money is no object, but I expect results. I should have recognized the warning signs immediately. Eva's approach to learning was superficial at best. She wanted to memorize phrases without understanding the tonal nuances or cultural context. When I tried to explain that Mandarin wasn't just about words, but about understanding the culture behind them, she waved her hand dismissively. "I don't need to understand their poetry or philosophy," she said with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "I just need to impress some business partners. Make me sound sophisticated." The sessions quickly became exercises in frustration. Eva would arrive late, often taking calls during our lessons, treating me less like a professional educator and more like hired help. She'd demand I fetch her specific brands of sparkling water, adjust the temperature in the room, even once asking me to walk her designer dog while she finished a phone call. I endured it all, thinking of my student loans decreasing with each humiliation. What made it worse was her complete lack of respect for the language itself. She'd mispronounce words deliberately, making jokes about how all Chinese sounds the same anyway. When I corrected her pronunciation of CXC for the 100th time, she rolled her eyes and said, "Close enough. They'll get what I mean." I started recording our sessions at her request. She claimed it would help her practice. In reality, I think she just wanted to avoid actually paying attention during our meetings. Those recordings would later become more valuable than I ever imagined. Months passed in this pattern. Eva's Mandarin remained elementary, at best, but she developed an impressive ability to memorize and parrot back phrases without understanding their meaning. She could recite a self-introduction that sounded fluent to an untrained ear, but any deviation from the script left her floundering. It was like teaching a parrot to recite Shakespeare, impressive on the surface, meaningless underneath. The fateful evening arrived in the form of Evercrest's annual charity gala. It was a black tie affair at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel, where Seattle's business elite gathered to network and write large checks for causes they'd forget by morning. I'd attended every year since joining the company, using these events to strengthen relationships with our international partners. I was deep in conversation with representatives from our Shanghai office when I noticed a familiar figure gliding through the crowd. My blood ran cold as I recognized Eva, though she looked different in the ballroom setting. She wore a stunning emerald gown and moved with the practiced grace of someone accustomed to being watched. But it was the man beside her that made my heart stop. Andrew Whitford, our CEO. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Eva Chen wasn't her real name. She was Clarissa Whitford, the CEO's wife, and I'd been teaching her under false pretenses for 6 months. The woman who'd treated me like a servant, who dismissed my expertise and mocked the language I'd spent years mastering, was married to my boss. Our eyes met across the crowded ballroom. I saw the exact moment recognition dawned on her face, followed quickly by panic. Then, rage. I was seated at a table with our international partners, engaged in a crucial discussion about expanding our operations in Shenzhen. When Clarissa approached our table, I was in the middle of translating a complex technical specification for one of our engineers. She stood there, waiting for acknowledgement. In any other circumstance, I would have immediately stood to greet the CEO's wife. But I was in the middle of preserving a multi-million-dollar relationship. And the partner from Shenzhen was notoriously impatient with interruptions. I held up a finger, the universal gesture for just a moment, and continued my translation. It was the wrong move. Clarissa's face flushed crimson. She stood there for another 30 seconds while I finished the translation, her designer heels tapping an angry rhythm on the marble floor. By the time I turned to acknowledge her, she had already stormed off. But not before several people noticed the interaction, or lack thereof. The next morning, I was summoned to Andrew Whitford's office. The CEO was a generally reasonable man in his 50s, known for his measured approach to business. But as I entered his corner office with its panoramic view of Elliott Bay, I could see the strain on his face. "Reese," he began, not meeting my eyes. "I'm afraid we have a situation." I remained silent, though my mind was racing. I'd already heard through the company grapevine that Clarissa had complained about my blatant disrespect at the gala, claiming I deliberately snubbed her in front of important guests. "My wife feels that your behavior last night was unacceptable," he continued, fidgeting with his Mont Blanc pen. "She's demanding immediate action." "With all due respect, Mr. Whitford," I said, keeping my voice steady. I was in the middle of a critical translation for the Shenzhen team. I didn't intend any disrespect. He sighed heavily. "I understand that. Reese, your work has been exemplary. The Bangkok expansion alone brought in $40 million in revenue last year. But..." He trailed off, and I could see the personal struggle written across his face. "But your wife wants me fired." I finished for him. "She's insisting on it," he admitted. "Claims it's about maintaining respect for leadership, setting an example for other employees." He finally looked at me directly. "I don't want to do this, Reese. You're one of our best. But Clarissa? She can make life very difficult when she doesn't get her way." I felt a cold fury building inside me. 5 years of dedication, countless successful negotiations, relationships I'd cultivated across Asia. All of it meant nothing compared to a bruised ego and a marriage dynamic I wanted no part of. "I see," I said quietly. "And there's nothing that can change your mind." "I'm afraid not," he said, looking genuinely pained. "HR will work out a generous severance package. We'll say it's a mutual decision, restructuring. Your reputation will remain intact." That's when I made my decision. If Clarissa Whitford wanted to play games with my career, she was about to learn that I'd been taking notes, literally. "Mr. Whitford," I said, reaching into my bag. "Before we proceed, there's something you should know about your wife's preparation for the upcoming Chen Industries negotiation." His head snapped up. Chen Industries was a massive Chinese conglomerate we'd been courting for 2 years. The potential contract was worth $80 million, and Clarissa had somehow convinced her husband to let her lead the cultural aspects of the negotiation, claiming her Mandarin skills would give Evercrest an edge. I pulled out my phone and selected a recording from 3 weeks prior. Clarissa's voice filled the office. "I don't care if the tones are wrong, Eva. Just tell me the words. I'll memorize them." "No, I don't need to know what each character means. Because they won't test me like a schoolchild, I just need to sound impressive for 20 minutes. Andrew's face went pale as the recording continued. His wife's voice dripped with disdain as she bungled basic pronunciations, dismissed cultural nuances, and revealed her complete lack of understanding. "She's been taking lessons from me for 6 months," I explained calmly. "Under a false name. Her Mandarin is memorized phrases at best. She doesn't understand the language, the culture, or the implications of what she's saying." If she leads that negotiation, she'll not only embarrass Evercrest, but potentially offend Chen Industries executives. The CEO sank into his chair, suddenly looking much older than his years. She told me she'd been studying for years, said she was nearly fluent. I pulled out a folder containing 6 months of lesson notes, including her signed agreement for tutoring services under her false name. She can recite perhaps 30 memorized phrases convincingly. The moment anyone deviates from her script or asks her to elaborate, the facade will crumble. The silence in the office was deafening. Outside, Seattle's ever-present rain began to tap against the windows, matching the rhythm of my racing heart. The Chen Industries meeting is in 2 weeks, Andrew said finally, his voice hollow. Yes, I confirmed. And if your wife attends as planned, pretending to be a cultural liaison, the deal will almost certainly fall through. Mr. Chen values authenticity above all else. Discovering deception would be unforgivable, in his eyes. Andrew's hands trembled as he reached for his phone. I need to think about this. Can you give me a day? I stood, smoothing my skirt. Of course. But Mr. Whitford, I should mention that Washington is a 2-party consent state for recordings. Your wife explicitly agreed to be recorded for educational purposes. What she didn't specify was that those recordings couldn't be used to verify her actual language proficiency if her claims about that proficiency affected business decisions. It was a gamble, but I could see from his expression that the implications were sinking in. His wife hadn't just lied to him, she'd potentially sabotaged an $80 million deal with her deception. I left his office and returned to my desk, where I began the process of backing up 5 years of work files. My colleagues sensed something was wrong, but knew better than to ask. Office politics at this level were like blood in the water. Everyone could smell it, but no one wanted to get too close to the feeding frenzy. That afternoon, I received a call from Victoria Chen. No relation to Eva or Chen Industries, thankfully. Victoria was Evercrest's head of legal. Reese, she said without preamble, I need you to bring all materials related to your tutoring arrangement with Mrs. Whitford to my office immediately. I gathered my files, including the contract Clarissa had signed as Eva Chen, and made my way to legal. Victoria was a sharp woman in her 40s who'd earned her reputation by being 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Sit, she commanded, gesturing to a chair across from her imposing desk. Tell me everything. I laid out the entire story. The false identity, the lessons, the recordings, the disrespect, and finally, the threat to the Chen Industries deal. Victoria took notes throughout, occasionally asking for clarification. She's threatening to sue you for violation of privacy if you don't delete the recordings, Victoria said finally. On what grounds? I asked. She consented to being recorded. The contract explicitly states that recordings were for educational purposes, which includes assessing progress and proficiency. Victoria smiled grimly. You've thought this through. I've had 6 months of being treated like a servant to think it through, I replied. Here's the situation, Victoria said, leaning back in her chair. Legally, you're probably in the clear. The recordings were consensual, and using them to verify claims of language proficiency that directly impact business operations could be argued as legitimate use. However, Mrs. Whitford has resources and connections. She could make your life very difficult, even if she ultimately loses. She's already making my life difficult, I pointed out. She's having me fired for not standing up fast enough at a party. Victoria nodded. Fair point. Here's what I propose we treat this as a business crisis rather than a personal dispute. The Chen Industries deal is too important to risk. I'll recommend to the board that they bring you in as a consultant for the negotiation, regardless of your employment status. It was a lifeline, but I knew it came with risks. And Clarissa, let me handle Mrs. Whitford, Victoria said with a predatory smile. I've been waiting for her to overstep for years. I left Victoria's office feeling a mix of hope and dread. The next 2 weeks would determine not just my career, but potentially the future of Evercrest's Asian expansion. The following days were a blur of legal meetings, hushed conversations, and careful maneuvering. I was officially terminated with a generous severance package, but quietly retained as a consultant for critical ongoing negotiations. Clarissa had won the battle, but the war was far from over. During this time, I received numerous texts from Clarissa, alternating between threats and attempts at bribery. She offered to triple my tutoring rate if I'd coach her intensively for the Chen Industries meeting. When I didn't respond, the messages became more desperate. You're destroying an important deal out of spite. I'll make sure you never work in Seattle again. Name your price. Everyone has one. And finally, please. I'll lose everything if this goes badly. That last message almost made me feel sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered 6 months of being treated like hired help, of watching her mock a language and culture I deeply respected, of her casual cruelty in having me fired for a perceived slight. The day of the Chen Industries meeting arrived with typical Seattle drizzle. I dressed carefully in my best suit, a charcoal gray ensemble I'd bought specifically for important negotiations. As I entered Evercrest's headquarters through the visitor's entrance, a small humiliation that stung more than I expected, I could feel the tension in the air. The meeting was scheduled for the executive boardroom on the 40th floor. As I emerged from the elevator, I saw Clarissa pacing in the hallway. She looked immaculate as always, but I could see the strain around her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands. "Reese," she said, her voice lacking its usual imperious tone. "We need to talk." I paused, maintaining professional distance. "Mrs. Whitford, I'll pay you $50,000 to say you've been coaching me wrong deliberately. Tell them it's your fault I'm not prepared." I stared at her in disbelief. Even now, facing professional humiliation, she was trying to shift blame rather than take responsibility. "No," I said simply and continued toward the boardroom. "You're going to regret this," she hissed. But I could hear the desperation beneath the threat. The boardroom was already filled when I entered. Andrew Whitford sat at the head of the table, looking haggard. The board members were present, along with Victoria from legal and several senior executives. At the far end of the table sat the Chen Industries delegation CEO, Chen Weiming, his daughter and CFO, Chen Liwan, and their head of international operations, Dr. Michael Wang. I took my place at the side of the table, officially there as a cultural consultant. But everyone knew the real reason for my presence. Clarissa entered last, her heels clicking confidently on the marble floor. But I could see the script cards hidden in her portfolio. Andrew opened the meeting with introductions, his voice steady despite the circumstances. When he introduced Clarissa as our cultural liaison who will be conducting portions of today's discussion in Mandarin, I saw Chen Weiming's eyes narrow slightly. He was a man in his 60s who had built his empire from nothing. And he hadn't done it by suffering fools. Clarissa stood, bowing slightly, too slightly, I noted, for someone of Chen Weiming's stature. She launched into her memorized introduction, "Nin hao, Chen Xiansheng, wo hing gaoxing ren xinin." Her pronunciation was passable for the memorized portion, but I could see Chen Lihuan, the daughter, hiding a smirk. Clarissa continued for about 30 seconds before Chen Weiming raised his hand. "Mrs. Whitford," he said in perfect English, "your pronunciation is quite good. Tell me, where did you study Mandarin?" It was a simple question, the kind any language learner should be able to answer easily. But it wasn't in Clarissa's script. "I woke she stammered, scrambling for words she didn't know. "I studied in various places." "I see," Chen Weiming said mildly. "And how long have you been studying our language?" Another simple question. Another deer-in-headlights moment from Clarissa. "Several years," she managed in English, abandoning any pretense of Mandarin fluency. Chen Lihuan leaned forward. "Perhaps you could tell us, in Mandarin, what you find most challenging about cross-cultural business negotiations." It was a softball question for anyone with genuine intermediate proficiency. It was also completely impossible for someone who had memorized 30 phrases without understanding the underlying language. Clarissa's face flushed. She glanced at her hidden script cards, then at Andrew, who was studiously avoiding her gaze. Finally, she looked at me with naked pleading in her eyes. I think perhaps we should conduct this portion in English, she said finally, to ensure clarity on such important matters. The silence that followed was excruciating. Chen Weiming's expression remained neutral, but his daughter wasn't bothering to hide her disdain. Dr. Wang was taking notes with the intensity of someone documenting a disaster. Mr. Whitford, Chen Weiming said, turning to Andrew. I was under the impression that your company valued cultural understanding and authentic communication. Was I mistaken? Andrew looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. No, Mr. Chen, you were not mistaken. I apologize for this. Misrepresentation. Misrepresentation, Chen Weiming repeated, tasting the word. An interesting choice of terms. In my experience, Mr. Whitford, companies that misrepresent their capabilities in small matters cannot be trusted with large ones. The Chen Industries delegation began gathering their materials. $80 million was about to walk out the door, and everyone in the room knew it. That's when Victoria spoke up. Mr. Chen, if I may, we've recently discovered this misrepresentation ourselves and have taken steps to address it. Ms. Parker here is our actual head of international market development and speaks fluent Mandarin. She's been instrumental in our Asian expansion. Chen Weiming's gaze shifted to me. Ms. Parker, you were not introduced as an employee. A recent organizational change, Victoria said smoothly. One we're in the process of correcting. Chen Weiming addressed me directly in Mandarin. Tell me, Ms. Parker, what do you think is the biggest challenge foreign companies face when entering the Chinese market? I responded in kind, my Mandarin flowing naturally after years of practice and real-world application. With respect, Mr. Chen, I believe the biggest challenge is the tendency to see China as a monolithic market rather than a diverse ecosystem of regional preferences, cultural nuances, and evolving consumer behaviors. Too many Western companies try to apply a one-size-fits-all approach, often relying on surface-level cultural understanding rather than genuine engagement. His daughter added a follow-up question about specific regional differences, and we fell into a rapid exchange about market segmentation strategies, cultural adaptation, and the importance of long-term relationship building in Chinese business culture. I could feel the room's attention on us, even from those who couldn't understand the language. After several minutes, Chen Weiming held up his hand. Enough, he said in English. Ms. Parker, you speak beautifully. More importantly, you understand. This is what we look for in partners. He turned to Andrew. Why was she introduced as a consultant rather than your head of development? Andrew cleared his throat. As Victoria mentioned, there have been some recent organizational changes. She was fired, Clarissa interjected suddenly, her voice shrill. For insubordination. She's not even an employee anymore. The room turned to stare at her. Even Andrew looked shocked by the outburst. Insubordination, Chen Lihuan asked, her tone deceptively mild. What kind of insubordination? Clarissa, perhaps realizing she'd made a tactical error, tried to backtrack. She was disrespectful at a company event, refused to acknowledge senior leadership. I see, Chen Weiming said slowly. And this senior leadership. Would that be you? Mrs. Whitford. Clarissa's silence was answer enough. Chen Weiming stood, and his delegation followed suit. Mr. Whitford, I'll be blunt. Your company has two choices. You can proceed with leadership that values appearance over substance, that punishes competence when it fails to bow sufficiently to egos. Or you can work with people who understand that in business, as in language, authenticity and genuine understanding matter more than memorized scripts. He gathered his materials, then paused. Ms. Parker, do you have a business card? I didn't. They'd been confiscated when I was terminated, but Victoria smoothly intervened, handing him one of hers. Ms. Parker can be reached through my office for the time being. Chen Weiming nodded. We'll be in touch. Perhaps there's opportunity for collaboration with professionals who value honesty. He gave a slight bow to the room at large, pointedly excluding Clarissa, and led his delegation out. The silence they left behind was deafening. Andrew's face had gone from pale to an alarming shade of red. The board members were exchanging meaningful looks. Clarissa stood frozen, perhaps finally understanding the magnitude of what she'd done. Everyone except board members and Victoria, out. Andrew said quietly. The dangerous calm in his voice was more frightening than shouting would have been. As I gathered my things, Clarissa grabbed my arm. This is your fault, she hissed. You set me up to fail. I carefully extracted my arm from her grip. No, Clarissa, I tried to teach you. You wanted shortcuts. You wanted to fake expertise rather than earn it. This outcome is entirely your own creation. Her face contorted with rage, but before she could respond, Andrew's voice cut through. Clarissa, my office. Now. I left the boardroom with my head high, but my heart was racing. I'd either just saved my career or destroyed it entirely. As I waited for the elevator, Victoria appeared beside me. Nicely played, she said quietly. Chen Weiming called me yesterday. He'd heard rumors about Mrs. Whitford's expertise and wanted to verify them. I may have suggested that seeing is believing. I stared at her in surprise. You knew this would happen. I suspected, she corrected. Mrs. Whitford has been overstepping for years, but Andrews always protected her. The board needed to see for themselves what her interference costs us. The elevator arrived, and we stepped inside. What happens now? I asked. Now. Victoria smiled. Now we wait for Chen Industries to make their move. And Reese, don't go far. I have a feeling you'll be getting a call soon. She was right. 3 hours later, as I sat in my apartment contemplating my suddenly uncertain future, my phone rang. It was Andrew Whitford himself. Reese, he said without preamble, are you available to come back to the office? The board would like to speak with you. I agreed, though my stomach was churning. Within an hour, I was back in the Evercrest boardroom, facing the full board of directors. Andrew sat at the head of the table, looking exhausted. Clarissa was nowhere to be seen. The board chairman, Richard Hartley, was a silver-haired man in his 70s who'd built his fortune in shipping before transitioning to venture capital. He fixed me with a steady gaze. Ms. Parker? We'll be direct. Chen Industries has agreed to continue negotiations, but with conditions. First, they want you personally involved in all discussions. Second, they want assurance that, quote, theatrical performances masquerading as cultural competence will not be tolerated. Their words, not mine. I remained silent, sensing there was more. Furthermore, he continued, our own investigation has revealed that Mrs. Whitford's interference has cost us several potential deals over the past 2 years. Partners who were initially interested mysteriously cooled after cultural meetings she insisted on leading. Another board member, Patricia Wong, leaned forward. We've also discovered she's been representing herself as a company officer in various social settings, despite holding no official position. This Chen Industries situation is simply the most egregious example. What are you asking of me? I said carefully. Richard Hartley smiled. We're offering you the position of Vice President of Global Development, reporting directly to the board rather than the CEO. You'll have full autonomy in hiring your team and developing our international strategy. The salary is double your previous compensation, with performance bonuses tied to successful deal closures. It was more than I'd ever dared hope for. But I had to ask, and Mrs. Whitford has been informed that she is no longer to represent Evercrest in any capacity. Patricia Wong said firmly, any attempts to interfere with company operations will be met with legal action. And Mr. Whitford agrees to this, I asked, glancing at Andrew. He spoke for the first time since I'd entered. My wife's actions could have cost us $80 million and destroyed our reputation in the Asian market. Yes, I agree, I should have acted sooner. I took a breath, considering I'll need written guarantees about autonomy and protection from retaliation. Victoria has already drawn up the contracts, Richard Hartley said, sliding a folder across the table. We anticipated your concerns. I spent the next hour reviewing the documents with Victoria. Everything was there: the autonomy, the protection, the resources I'd need to rebuild the relationships Clarissa had damaged. It was vindication on a scale I hadn't imagined. As I signed the contracts, Patricia Wong asked, "How did you know to record those tutoring sessions?" I smiled. I didn't. At first, she asked me to record them so she could practice. But after the first few sessions, when I realized she had no genuine interest in learning, I kept recording to protect myself. I've learned that when someone treats service providers with contempt, they usually have contempt for everyone they see as beneath them. Documentation is sometimes the only defense. The next months were a whirlwind of activity. The Chen Industries deal closed successfully at $85 million. $5 million more than initially projected, thanks to provisions I negotiated based on regional market insights. Word spread quickly through the international business community that Evercrest had new leadership in its global division, someone who actually understood the markets we were entering. Clarissa made several attempts to sabotage my work. She spread rumors at society events, tried to poison relationships with partners' spouses, even attempted to hire a private investigator to find dirt on me. Each attempt failed spectacularly, usually backfiring when people realized the source of the attacks. The final confrontation came 6 months later at another charity gala. Different hotel, same crowd. I was there in my official capacity, hosting a table of Asian partners. Clarissa approached during the cocktail hour, looking diminished somehow. The designer dress was still there, but the imperious confidence was gone. "You destroyed my life," she said without preamble. I studied her calmly. "No, Clarissa. You destroyed your own credibility by faking expertise and treating people as disposable. I simply refuse to be collateral damage. Andrew barely speaks to me. The board banned me from company property. Everyone knows what happened." "What everyone knows," I corrected, "is that you lied about speaking Mandarin, nearly sabotaged a major deal, and tried to have a key employee fired for a perceived social slight. Those are all choices you made." She stared at me with undisguised hatred. "I could have learned Mandarin properly if you'd been a better teacher." Even now, she couldn't take responsibility. "I tried to teach you properly. You wanted shortcuts and window dressing. You can't fake your way through real expertise. Clarissa, languages, like respect, have to be earned." "This isn't over," she said. But the threat lacked conviction. "Yes, it is," I replied. "You have no power here anymore. Your husband's reputation protects you socially, but professionally, you're done, and we both know it." She walked away without another word, her heels clicking on the marble with less certainty than before. I watched her go, feeling neither triumph nor pity. She was simply irrelevant now, a cautionary tale about the perils of false pretenses and unchecked privilege. Andrew Whitford and I developed a professional working relationship over the following years. He never mentioned his wife in my presence, and I never brought her up. He became a better CEO without her interference, more focused on merit than appearances. The company thrived, expanding into markets across Asia, Europe, and South America. But the real satisfaction came from the work itself. Every successful negotiation, every partnership built on mutual respect and genuine understanding felt like a repudiation of everything Clarissa had represented. I hired a diverse team of professionals who understood that language was just the beginning of cultural competence. That real connection required humility and continuous learning. Chen Weiming became a mentor of sorts, inviting me to exclusive forums for international business leaders. At one such event in Singapore, he pulled me aside. "You know why I really gave Evercrest a second chance?" he asked, sipping excellent oolong tea. "Because you saw potential for profit," I suggested. He laughed. "Profit is everywhere if you look." "No. I gave you a second chance because you didn't try to save face when Clarissa failed. You could have covered for her, made excuses, tried to salvage the situation with half-truths. Instead, you let the truth speak for itself. That kind of integrity is rare. It nearly cost me everything, I admitted. But it didn't. He pointed out, because truth has a way of surfacing, especially in business. Lies require constant maintenance. Truth just requires courage. Looking back now, from my corner office with its view of the Seattle skyline, I sometimes think about those tutoring sessions in Clarissa's penthouse. How different things might have been if she'd approached learning with genuine curiosity instead of arrogant entitlement. If she'd treated me as a professional rather than a servant. If she'd valued authenticity over appearance. But then again, if she had been a different person, I might still be a department head instead of a vice president. Her downfall became my opportunity, not through malicious plotting, but through simple competence and documentation. She created the very weapons used against her, the recordings she requested, the lies she told, the enemies she made through casual cruelty. There's a Chinese proverb I learned during my time in Beijing. He who returns from a journey is not the same as he who left. Clarissa thought she could take a shortcut to transformation, memorizing phrases instead of embracing change. But real growth requires humility, effort, and respect for what you're trying to learn. My phone buzzes with a message from Chen Lihuan about a new opportunity in renewable energy technology. As I prepare for another negotiation, another chance to bridge cultures through genuine understanding, I think about the lesson Clarissa inadvertently taught me. Competence isn't just about what you know, but about recognizing what you don't know and being willing to learn. The Seattle rain continues outside, but in here, the view is clear. I built this career on real expertise, earned through years of study and practice. No one can take that away, no matter how powerful their connections or how wounded their pride. And that's a security worth more than any severance package or board protection. Sometimes I wonder if Clarissa ever did learn Mandarin properly. Somehow, I doubt it. Real learning requires admitting ignorance first, and she never could manage that simple step. But I've learned to let go of wondering about her altogether. She's a cautionary tale now. Nothing more, a reminder that in business, as in language, authenticity eventually reveals itself. The empire of lies she built crumbled at the first real test. The foundation I've built on truth and genuine expertise has only grown stronger. And that's the best revenge of all. Not destroying someone else, but building something they could never achieve with all their shortcuts and pretense. As I prepare for my next meeting, conducted in fluent Mandarin with partners who've become friends, I allow myself one moment of satisfaction. Clarissa thought she could destroy my career with a snap of her manicured fingers. Instead, she destroyed her own credibility and launched me to heights she could only pretend to reach. The moral is simple. Really never underestimate someone you've treated as beneath you. They might just be taking notes. And in a world where authenticity increasingly matters more than artifice, those notes might be worth more than all the designer dresses and memorized phrases money can buy.